So we're just waiting on Jane and Kenny.
I'm here.
Oh, Jane's
I'm
there.
here.
Good.
And Kenny's there.
Oh, I just need to scroll over to the side here. Okay. So it sounds like we're all here. Welcome, Kenny.
Thank you.
I'll meeting to order and ask Laura to call the roll.
Commissioner Sill,
Here.
Commissioner Chung,
Here.
Commissioner Koch,
Here.
and Vice Chair Ross.
Here.
And me.
Yeah.
And
Oh, I'm sorry. Sometimes on Zoom, I can't find the people. I'm sorry. Commissioner Wilson.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I was having the same problem. I forgot to scroll. But here we all are. And let's see. I think our first order of business is the election of a new commissioner. And hopefully, Kenny, you know you're getting installed today. And Laura, is that your agenda item? Or is Sharon going to have that?
I'll start by saying welcome, Kenny. It's very nice to have you on the ASCC. It's exciting to have a new member, so thank you very much for joining us. Sharon is here to actually swear you in, which is a little awkward on Zoom, not nearly as charming as when we would get to do it in person in the old schoolhouse. But that way we can kind of cross off that line. And then we realized that there hasn't always been a practice of swearing in ASCC members. So we want to start that practice and be doing it regularly. So we'd like to swear in the ASCC members that are newly appointed. So I'll hand it over to Sharon.
Oh, good afternoon.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi. So Commissioners Sill, Chung,
Yes.
and where am I? Ross. Sorry, I was looking for you on the screen. If you would please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, please state your full name,
I, Alvin Sill,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California
the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of California,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California,
of the United States,
to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I will take this obligation freely
That I take this obligation
freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of
evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties
upon which I am about to enter.
upon which I am about to enter.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Sharon.
You're welcome.
Okay. And of course, while technically the three of us are new members, two of us are also old members. But Kenny, a special welcome to you. And it's always nice to greet and incorporate a new commissioner to our body. So glad to have you here.
Can I just ask, because I'm not a citizen, how is that going to work for me? Because I don't.
Well, you may still have to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign. I don't think the oath says that you're a citizen.
Okay, all right.
Good question for Sharon, though.
But Britain might not want her pledging allegiance to another government.
I'll look through that. I'll look into that and just make sure we're not missing anything and get back to you, Jane.
Okay, thank you.
I believe the Constitution of the United Kingdom and the United States are not in conflict.
No,
Hmm.
well, I hope not.
The
I hope
question
not.
is, would we be welcome back?
Okay.
Okay. Having dispensed with that item, we'll go to item 2 of the new business, which is annual election of chair and vice chair, an annual ritual. Traditionally, just as a piece of warning, anybody who signs up and is elected for vice chair is on a path to be chair the following year. So as almost all of you know, it's not to be taken too lightly to be vice chair, because you might end up getting stuck with the chair job down the road. That being said, I'll entertain nominations for, I think probably first we should handle the chair.
I'll
Okay,
nominate-
well, I'll nominate Dave Ross.
Second.
Any other nominations for chair? Is that sufficient? All right. Well, Laura, Sharon, do we just vote on this? I think that's how we've done it in the past.
Yes, please.
Okay, we have a motion to appoint Dave Ross, me, as the chairman. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Apparently none. All right. Vice chair, the really important question, because this one hasn't been in any way predetermined. So I'll entertain nominations for vice chair. And, you know, self-nominations are welcome. So if somebody wants to step up and nominate themselves, feel free.
I'll nominate myself,
Okay?
Megan Koch.
Any other nominations to consider?
I'll nominate Jane.
Okay? So we have a competitive race here for vice chair. Jane, are you willing to accept that nomination?
Yes.
If Jane would like to do it, since I don't think she has, I certainly would offer her that opportunity.
You've sort of been around the block a couple times, Megan.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it would be a great opportunity for Jane if she's
Sure. Mhm.
interested in doing it. So I'm happy to second that nomination too. And if there are no other nominations, let's vote on Jane for vice chair. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstaining? Looks unanimous to me. Jane, congratulations.
Yay.
Okay. Now we have an item that we've been anticipating for a while, looking forward to, which is a presentation from the Conservation Committee regarding amendments to the municipal code for protected trees. And I am very interested in this and really curious to hear what you have. Is there any staff presentation on this before Judy makes a presentation?
And there's not a staff presentation. At the conclusion of the discussion, I can provide some feedback on what the next steps may be, if you'd like to hear that.
Great. All right, Judy, it's all yours.
Very good, thank you. So I am not starting off with a kind of the erudite presentation that Dylan and Laura would do with the references to the code numbers and all of that historically. My understanding is that the tree permit, as you've seen it, and I don't have the, I think it was probably in your agenda package. So I am not going to struggle with putting it up. I think it's the original one that was done back when the town was founded, as far as I know. I don't know. I didn't do any in-depth historical research, but nobody on the committee could remember making changes to it before. And people like Dieter have been on the committee for, 40 years. So this is the list that the town uses to standardize who has to get a tree removal permit, to standardize criteria to protect our heritage trees, and to standardize when removal is appropriate. So it's obviously to take away any possibility of deciding one thing for Mr. A and another for Mr. B because of relative influence or anything like that. There are less quantifiable things that apply when we look at this. Condition of the tree, the location of the tree, near the house, in a grove of similar trees, or all by itself, in a commanding position, etc. But that's the purpose of the permit, in a way, is to say these trees need to be looked at carefully. So as you can see from the list, there are lots of trees that aren't on this. It doesn't say anything about trees you can plant, trees you can't plant. Those things are handled elsewhere. And so there are obviously trees in town where you don't need a permit to take them out. If you have a eucalyptus tree and want to take it out, you need a permit. You don't need to come through us for a permit. I don't even think you need a permit because it's not on this list. The simpler ones, I have a dead tree and a picture of it sent. It's done by staff. It doesn't come to conservation, but anything that's at all questionable, the neighbors wouldn't like it. It's clearly a heritage tree. It's just that they want it out for the view. The neighbors still want it, etc. If there's anything iffy about it, all comes to conservation. So we started working on this request a couple of years ago because we saw 2 sites in different parts of town that had magnificent old manzanitas on them. I mean, 100-year-old manzanitas that were just glorious specimens. And they are not on this list. They're not protected in any way. They were being basically ignored by the landscape architect. The plan was to take them out, etc. And so we got to thinking they should be on this list. And then just in the spirit of, Jeremy's asked us whenever we do something to look at the larger picture as well as the small individual picture, we sort of stepped back and said, well, let's look at the list as a whole. Is there anything on it that shouldn't be? Is there anything that's not on that should be? Etc. etc. So we could bring it up to what we thought was the current thinking about things. And so we had about a year of discussion. The subcommittee talked about all of these things in pieces, talked about other things. Should they go on? Shouldn't they? And last February, we were getting ready to bring it to ASCC when the world fell apart, as you know. So here we are back now to finally do it. So if you can look at it, basically most of it is the same. We are suggesting you remove California Bay Laurel, not you, but that the town removes, and it just comes through you for your approval and to tweak if you want. The Bay Laurels we suggested we take out because of their risk to sod that wasn't known about previously. There are places in town where it's appropriate to have a Bay Laurel. This isn't changing this list, doesn't say take it out. If you're riparian, there aren't oaks near you, etc. It's a wonderful tree, but you no longer need a permit to take it out if it comes off of here. And then we added a couple of things. The golden oaks were put on there because we had a site permit a year and a half ago or so up on the street named Golden Oak, where along one edge of the property was a stand of lovely golden oaks, and they were slated for removal because nobody was paying any attention to. They aren't large trees like the ones we think of more typically, and yet they're slow growing, are typical in that area. Obviously, the street was named after them. I don't know how many of them were there years ago. So we added that one. We added a couple of others that I wouldn't know if I saw them, but the botanists on the committee say they're around and valuable. And the arborists who are out looking at trees, you know, should be able to identify them. And then at the very end, importantly, where we started with all this was adding manzanitas. Now the manzanita is a difficult one because you can see where we tried to have a lot of precision about the other trees, what size are protected. Below that, if they're young, you can take them out. That one, because they're multiple trunks and they grow variously in various settings, it's very hard to quantify it. So we put mature shrubs, which is vaguer than we would have liked to be, but every attempt we made to pin it down, we couldn't really do it as accurately as we wanted in a way that made any sense. So it falls back into the category that's sort of like pornography, you know it's that if you see it, even though you can't really define it terribly precisely. So that's it.
I have a
Great.
question about the madrones.
Uh-huh.
That seems a little large for a madrone, don't you think? I mean,
Yeah,
the diameter of
because they're
7
so slow growing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a good
In the
point.
diameter, they're really actually, the trunks themselves don't really get that grand and beefy, but the tree, you know, I don't know, maybe that's one to consider of moving into the smaller tree size to keep.
Yeah, that's a good
Taking the
idea.
size down a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
because those, I mean, you can't even plant one if you find one really successfully.
Right.
Just
we-
a thought.
Pardon?
Could
I
we,
said just a thought. Go ahead, Jane.
okay, sorry. Could we, with the circumference, could we do a uniform thing? Because 6, I don't know whether it's because I'm the different way we numerate things in the UK, but I read 6.3 as 6 foot 3 inches, and I was thinking, so could we do it the same way as the other ones, as in, or just say, you know, 6 inches rather than 6 foot 6.
I think it was a translation up from 2 inches in diameter. I think someone just did math
Oh,
and it came out that way. I think it would probably be fine just to round it down to 6.
Yeah.
Call it
And
6.
so
I think that's a
why-
good suggestion.
okay, and
Yeah,
could-
I agree. I think, still small numbers that don't make sense and just confuse issues.
could we also add creeping manzanita? So mature shrubs and creeping, because that's something that gets pulled out.
Those ground, the ground
creeping.
cover manzanitas,
Yes,
they
like the
get
emerald carpet, those ones.
right. I don't know if they're quite as the treasures. I mean, I like you think they're wonderful. I don't know what their lifespan is, but
Yeah.
I can go back. So one question here is, shall I take these suggestions and circle back to conservation with them, Laura, and have us talk about it one more time and then circle back to you guys again? I'm happy to do that. That might make the most sense since we've already been talking about it for a long time. And some of these things got, argued out in subcommittee where I didn't hear the pros and cons,
Yeah.
probably.
And
But I
also-
certainly think that going to 6 instead of 6.3 issues is a no-brainer.
right.
And I agree that the madrone, I think that came up at one time, and I can't remember why it went away because I think several of us thought they should be smaller.
And you haven't included interior oaks, canyon oaks, and island oaks. So could we go for all the 9 natives, California?
I don't know why those aren't there. I think some of I know there was one, I can't remember the exact species name that we argued about whether to have it on there or not. And it was felt that there'd only been one seen, and yes, that it was a treasure, but there'd only been one seen in a rastrodero once and that they weren't around. So we felt like it just sullied the list to get it too complicated, to have too many things on it as if they weren't even around. But canyon and which other one, Jane?
Interior, which is Quercus wislenii. Canyon, which is Quercus chrysolepsis, and island, which is Quercus tomentella. I mean, that way we could just say all oaks, whereas we could get people arguing all,
Well, all native
oaks.
oaks. I mean, there are any
Yeah, I
number
know.
of oaks that planted in town, red oaks, et cetera, that are not native to the area. And we have
Yeah.
no problems with people cutting those down at all.
Yeah.
So
But we
I'm
could
not
say the
sure
native-
why these other native ones were not included, but I'm happy to
Yeah, I think
take
there's
that
9.
back.
I think there's 9 natives.
Okay. And are they ones that are actually around? Or are they just native to Northern California? Are they native to the Bay Area and we actually see them?
I think they're meant to be native to California. I mean, there's another one called the Tucker oak, but I've never seen that.
Well,
So-
and there are oaks that are native to California, but that are only found in the southern part of the state.
Mhm.
So they're not on here either.
Yeah.
Valley oak, for example.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Laura, I'd like to make a suggestion for just procedure here, and that is that we continue this roundtable discussion, and Judy will be able to take the minutes of it back to the Conservation Committee for consideration of our comments, and then simply submit a report back to the Planning Department rather than have to come and make another presentation here. And if anybody on the
Yes.
commission has a problem with it, then we could maybe take it up again. But just to bring close to this, that's been going on for a very long time, I think the list is very close, and it would be worth getting it wrapped up.
Yeah, I
And to be
think
able
that's a
to move it
question.
forward. I think that Kenny has a question as well.
Go ahead,
I
Kenny.
was just wondering if the not being able to quantify the manzanitas seems like a problem, or that it's going to generate problems. And it seems like if people know it when they see it, then we should be able to quantify it with something like cumulative diameter at breast height within a certain area.
Right, with
I
the
mean-
bays, it was easier to do, but the manzanitas are sometimes, 5 or 6 trunks, sometimes they're small, sometimes they grow really slowly, so they're old, and gnarly, and they're old without getting so big in the trunk.
Is there
Um,
any way to determine the age without hurting the tree or shrub?
Yeah.
Cut it off at chest height and
probably
count the
not.
limbs.
Shush.
Yeah.
Like the last pine that was down in Southern California somewhere where someone cut it down to see how old it was.
I mean, they do. They will core trees to determine the age. That's
Tricky
Right,
with
they can, but
manzanita.
that might be asking more of a resident than we want to do in terms of the expense. And
What
the
about instead of
complication.
trunk size and circumferences or a different measurement we could use? Because manzanitas, as you said, do not grow the same way a singular trunk or even oak with multiple trunks. It's still so much more substantial.
Right. Well, I'll just go back to the botanists and the horticulturists in the group and say, figure this out. Yeah,
Sure.
John?
Yeah, just to weigh in, I remember this discussion. This is one of the reasons that this whole process has been in the works in the Conservation Committee for the last several years. The discussion about manzanitas has gone on and gone around back and forth over the exact same situation. And I think it was, I actually looked at this and thought, okay, well, that makes sense to just put it out there with all, because it's not a matter of saying you can't cut down any of these. It's just a matter of, we better look at this. So I think it makes sense to get it on people's radar that way, whatever way you can. And trying to measure those things, it's impossible.
Yeah.
Notice that
so many
the
different
label
ways.
says for mature shrubs, so maybe a better definition of what mature means would be helpful. And I see Jane has a comment.
yeah, completely off manzanitas and oaks, but with the eucalyptus, have we started a thing where you don't need a permit to cut eucalyptus down?
Eucalyptus is not on this list, and
Yeah.
so it's not something you need a permit for.
Okay, right. Well, but encouragement to cut them down.
That's very different than this list.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so the encouragement to cut them down would be something that I would recommend that this group take up when we look at revisions to the design guidelines for fire safety. So that's something that we'll have on our work program. So that will be a very good place for this commission to look at that, kind of separate from what requires a permit to take out. So if I can recap a little bit, I think some of what I'm hearing, I think if Judy can go back to her group and respond to some of the questions that have come up, One thing I would add about kind of the numbers between diameter and circumference, it's most common in my experience, the trees are measured in diameter. That's what I've seen the most over the years in arborist plans and topographic surveys. So that's usually the starting point, and then they're converted. So if the Conservation Committee finds that that diameter is really, and some of these diameters are quite small, that diameter is really the important one, we may end up with a strange number. But we staff, when we write the code, will be consistent in how we write those numbers so that they're easy to understand. In regards to the manzanita issue, I definitely hear what everyone's saying. I'm feeling a little bit uneasy because staff will have to, if we just say mature, right? Staff will have to make a decision about what's mature. And I don't know, we would really need to think about how staff would make that decision for very routine permit applications and how we would describe that to the public, because this may become a very common application that we would receive to remove a manzanita plant. So I want to make sure that we think through that a little bit more in terms of, let me give you an idea of next steps also, because that may help the commission decide how you want to handle this. We are going to have a consultant planner that has worked in a similar community, Los Altos Hills, actually write up this code amendment, and it will have to go to Planning Commission and to Town Council in order to amend the code. So there are a couple of steps that have to happen. And so it may be effective, for example, if we have that planner, because she's pretty much ready to start whenever we're ready on this project, meet with Judy or other members of the Conservation Committee. And maybe we can see if there's any other best practices or if any other communities have a way to measure manzanitas. I've not seen one myself, but maybe we could find something like that and try to bring some kind of numeric measurement into play. And then if not, we'll just need good definitions from the arborist biologists, the experts, about how we're going to define that and how we would implement it so that we can share that with the public and staff would be able to actually, carry it forward. So
Right.
those are my thoughts based on the conversation that you've had so far.
So can I say that it might be one of those things that staff would never decide just in-house. They would always punt us because they wouldn't want to take that. We're sort of willing to have the work. We talked about our workload will go up if we add that onto here, and we don't have any trouble with that. And some of it, and once again, the arbitrariness of some of it comes in that you get a permit, you go out and and there are these manzanitas, and it's certainly possible you'd say, oh, these are fabulous and da-da-da and in good places and appropriate. And that one is probably older than all of them, but it's scraggly as hell and it's up too close
Right.
to where the house is going to be, and it's going to be a fire risk. Because we have the added part of the discussion was now manzanita is one of the things that's more flammable, and so it's on that list. And so we would be much more generous about saying, oh, it's near the house. Of course, it's a shame, but it should come out. A lot of this gets done in the talking with the person who wants the tree out and giving them the reasons. As John said, it's a screen, it's not the document that makes the decision. It's the screen for having someone who knows more about it make the decision. Jane?
The fire department don't like scrub oaks either, so we're just there's going to be a lot of things concerning that.
Right.
Yeah,
And so we started to take that into account a little more when we look at trees. It used to be that we were the Conservation Committee has been the tree huggers supreme. You want that tree out sort of over our dead bodies. You got to have a really good reason. And now, we try to be really practical. Things that are, in close, then they shouldn't, or too dense, then they shouldn't, even though they're trees that we might have protected 15 years ago. Now we would say, yeah, it makes sense to take that out. So that all gets put in the package. As I say, this isn't something that says it's okay to plant it. That's a whole different conversation. And we would still, the Conservation Committee still will be saying when there's manzanitas on the plan, we'll be looking at, are they far enough away from the house? We didn't used to consider that, but now with fire concerns, that'll be on our radar for where do you want to put these manzanitas? Yeah.
Laura, is it the case that this list is referred to most often the tree removal permit is independent of any other review. In other words, when we get an ASCC application, it'll identify the trees on the site and identify the trees that are slated for removal, and we can talk about that. But if there is no other process that an applicant is going through, it's just a standalone tree removal permit, then this list is more critical. And I think what I hear Judy suggesting is that a kind of a discretionary review be available from the Conservation Committee when it comes to manzanitas. But I also see the staff difficulty with that of not being able to, with the redwood, you can measure it. And if it's below the threshold, sure, the permit gets issued. Having to direct the applicant to the Conservation Committee to schedule someone to come out and look at the manzanita could be, if all the person is doing is some landscaping or clearing some brush because of fire concerns, then that could be kind of a cumbersome process. So I understand the reason for wanting to have a more process for manzanita, but I think it would, if you guys can figure out a way to make most decisions decidable at the staff level, I think that would be really helpful.
I think it would make sense for us to try to come up with some minimum size that's on the conservative side, so that there are ones that might come out, and we might have to have then two categories: the ground cover-ish ones and the shrub ones.
Yeah.
And and for the ground cover, have how much it's spread perhaps, and for the shrubs have some either the size of the bubble or the trunk size or something. Yeah, we'll go back and look at it again. As John said, we're not going to come up with something perfect, but I get that, especially for staff, it would be important to have some numbers they could attach to. Yeah. So Laura, let me just ask you a question. When you're talking about the drafting the new legislation, if we round 6.3 down to 6, for example, is there a problem in the legislation that the circumference and the diameter are not exactly the same thing?
Yes. So we'll just have to solve for that, but we can take care of that.
Okay, so it can still say 6, but you'll know it's really 2 in diameter. And because of the reports, the arborist reports we see have these 2 columns usually.
Yeah, I think it's probably better to stick with 1.
If I could jump in, I think that the numbers you're talking about here come from the standard arborist tape measures that have tenths of inches, which is some bizarre thing they decided years ago. So that's the standard way of measuring trees. And I expect we're kind of stuck with those odd fractions.
They have a tape measure or they have a caliper. If you're doing diameter, they need kind of a caliper thing. I was thinking maybe they had.
The tape measure shows both at the same time. They show a diameter and circumference at the same time.
But do they do it with a tape that goes around, John, or do they do it with a caliper?
They wrap it around the tree.
So they're measuring circumference, but then extrapolating out to diameter.
They're marked. Both measurements are marked on the tape.
Yeah.
And we're not.
And I was just gonna.
We're not embracing the metric system anytime soon.
You can add that, especially for large
We're halfway
trees.
there with tenths of
Yes.
It can be difficult to measure the diameter of a large tree, especially if it's kind of a multi-trunk tree, say a redwood that might be 2 or 3 trunks still joined near the base. Diameter is a pretty sketchy thing, but circumference is easy. It might take 2 people, but circumference is really easy. So I'd just suggest sticking with circumference, because measuring the diameter of something that you can't put your arms around, or if you don't have a caliper that opens to 4 feet, or you can't decide which side of the tree to measure the diameter on.
Right, they have lumps.
Circumference is a real easy go-to.
Okay, so I'll go
And
back
this
to
is
with?
I was just gonna say, Dave's point is important because property owners will try to go out and measure themselves first, and then they kind of call or email us and say, do I need an arborist? So we actually do need something that is resident friendly, but
Right.
also consistent with the standard arborist procedures. That's what we're aiming for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think circumference would do it. And I want to make sure we open this discussion for comments from the public in case there's anybody following along that wants to check in on this. And that reminds me that in my enthusiasm to get the meeting started, we skipped right over oral communication.
Yeah, yeah.
So when we wrap up this item, I'll open general oral communications.
Okay, thanks. So I'll go back to conservation with this. Do we want to add the other native oaks as Jane's suggested? And if, have a discussion about
They're
yes or
locally
not, why
native.
or why not?
Yeah.
Locally
Yeah,
native.
yeah. Talk to your botanist friends, and if they really are local to here, local natives, then add them. Otherwise, I'd leave them off.
Make the madrone size smaller.
Yep.
Change to 6.0 instead of 6.3 on the smaller oak.
Or just abandon diameter altogether. Disregard diameter.
But diameter is really
Diameter
used.
is the
commonly.
the official standard, says Laura.
Yeah.
So
Doesn't make sense to me, but
it's
Unfortunately, I've worked in a,
it's left
yeah,
over from the Roman times.
it's just the old way of doing it. And I've worked in places where we only had circumference, and you'd be amazed how hard it was to get everyone to do that. So we want to stay with the industry standard as much as we can.
And last is quantify the manzanitas in some time. Did I miss any of your
Some-
concerns?
Right.
No,
Okay.
that sounds good.
Thank you very much. Appreciate.
well, don't leave yet because we're not done with this item.
Okay.
I want to invite any members of the public who are here to make comments or ask questions about this item to raise their hand electronically so that Laura or Dylan can put them online. Is there anybody from the public wants to discuss this?
We've got Nicholas
Bigger.
Targ with his hand up, so I'll go ahead and allow him to participate.
Great. Welcome, Nicholas.
Thank you. It's nice to be here with you. I think that I may be acting in my, or I may be here in my planning commissioner role, but I'd also raise a question. And that is, if the fire marshal determines that it's reasonably necessary to remove any of these trees for fire protection purposes, would it be necessary to have further consultation other than perhaps to provide notice to town staff?
Excellent question.
My initial response would be if the removal was part of an approved vegetation management plan or something similar that was already approved with a project, then it would not require any additional permit. But even if the fire marshal requested that something be removed and we all agreed it was a good idea, it would still need a permit if it was listed as a protected tree in the code.
And so the applicant would provide some directive from the fire department saying this tree needs to go.
Yeah, so we do have those examples where the applicant just tells us that they've been working with fire and it was recommended to be removed for whatever reason. And then we use that as a criteria to approve the removal.
May I respectfully suggest that we memorialize that in the plan and guidance that we're putting together?
I think that's a good idea. I put down in my notes that we probably need to develop more clear criteria. So I think planning staff could work with conservation committee on developing that language when we work on the code and the implementation of it.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No hands up, Laura?
No other hands are up for this item.
Okay, good. Well, Judith, thank you for bringing this forward and looking forward to seeing the end result and the next step in the process.
All right. Thank you.
So we'll
Thanks.
close that item, and I'd like to go back to our very first item that I managed to skip over, which is oral communications. So members of the public, anybody is invited to speak to us on an item that is not on our agenda today, but that they would like to bring to our attention. So I'll invite oral communications now. And I can't see, my screen isn't set up to show whether anybody is.
There are no hands up on
Okay.
Zoom.
Okay, great. Well, then I'll close that item and we'll move on. And we don't have a lot else on our agenda. Let's see. Implementation of Blue Oaks Planned Unit Development PUD. That's item 4 of new business. And that looks like Laura and Dylan.
So I'll just give a brief introduction to this, and then Dylan has a couple things to share on the screen. The background on this is that we have several PUDs in town where the land is very clear for what's expected to happen when the project is first constructed, but not always as clear with what's supposed to happen after the project is completed, and people may come back for changes over the years. So we've encountered this on a couple of PUDs recently where we haven't been sure how the ASCC may want us to proceed. So we thought this was a good discussion item to bring back because some things are clearly in the ASCC's discretion and some of these PUDs, but some things are kind of in the gray area, and some things are could be delegated from ASCC to staff. So this project came up recently in Blue Oaks, and we discussed it amongst ourselves. And originally the scope was kind of small, but then they increased the scope a little bit. And then we all kind of looked at each other and said, I'm not sure what ASCC would like us to do. So we wanted to go over this issue with you, give you some examples and just talk it through a little bit and get your feedback and direction. And then that will help us on implementation of this one and maybe others. And then if necessary, we could in the future bring back other PUD kind of judgment calls to get the commission's feedback, or maybe we could establish a procedure where a commissioner or two, depending on the situation, could give us feedback. So that's the background information on this one. So I'll ask Dylan to go over the example that we had in mind to get us started.
Okay, so let me share my screen with everybody. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so as Laura mentioned, in reviewing the PUD document, and so I kind of highlighted a few examples of kind of ambiguous or nuanced language in the PUD that creates a bit of confusion when it comes to staff implementing the PUD, and particularly advising applicants that live in the community if they're subject to ASCC. My understanding is a lot of things have been just directly sent to ASCC. A most recent example would be 19 Redberry, which was a landscaping plan with some hardscape improvements. That one was originally inclusive of a pool, and that was stricken from the scope of work, just given some concerns from staff's perspective. But it opened up a bigger conversation because there are a few other projects that have come either informally through staff discussions or whatnot that create a little bit of confusion on what direction to take. So I'll just go through kind of the bookmarks that I have. So the first one is related to kind of development review, minimum and maximum requirements. So this language just notes that the ASCC approval is during a final subdivision map or the individual lot development, but not necessarily redevelopment. The language is a bit ambiguous in that component. And then if you go down to the second section, and if anybody can't read this, I can zoom it in if you need to.
Can you zoom in, please?
Sure. Let's see.
And can you close the comment bar on the right so that it can be a little bigger still? That might help as well.
Okay. Let's see if this. Let's see if it'll let me. Okay.
That's good.
Okay. And so the second item that I pointed out is there is this language that talks about the interpretation and the application of the PUD. And specifically, there is language that says restrictive requirements may be imposed by the ASCC or other approving authority when determined necessary to meet the criteria for approving any specific application or proposal. In staff's interpretation, a ministerial permit could be approved by staff or through the director. And so it's a bit unclear on what this language, what the result or the end result is of this. This language, if it should go directly to ASCC or if there's flexibility in having staff review something that is a minor modification.
Is there a Blue Oaks Housing Association, Homeowners Association? Sorry.
There is. The next highlighted section, the BODC, is the Blue Oaks Design Committee, which is a committee under the Blue Oaks Homeowners Association. And so in my experience, the Blue Oaks generally tends to defer review of this PUD and approval to staff. So a homeowners association approval letter may read, the project is approved, however, town staff will review to make sure that it's conforming to the PUD and any other town. So the HOA is involved in approving the project, either at the front end or the back end. But there is a homeowners association that is supposed to review this project under the guidance of the PUD.
But they defer, but they would defer, it sounds like, to the ASCC and the town. So
yes,
they're not going to override any town decision or ASCC decision.
That's my understanding. And to that point, so this highlighted section is talking about building permits for accessory structures and buildings. So it says it's subject to the Blue Oaks Design Committee and ASCC approval. Yeah. But it also notes that the ASCC may assign responsibility for such approval to town staff when the ASCC finds that that delegation is appropriate and will not jeopardize achieving the intent of this PUD statement. And so that language refers to these building permits for accessory structures and buildings. But that language is not carried forward in the previous examples I showed. And so, for example, I'll go through. So this section is kind of more of the common things that ASCC looks at, like components of the project. So the first section is entryways. And so the PUD notes that visible and intrusive entryways shall be minimized and entry structures are generally discouraged. This is talking about driveway entrances. But however, the subject to BODC and ASCC approval, there's minor entry structures or gates may be permitted when located within the building envelope, which is BE, or setback from the front property line. And so typically with a minor entry structure would be like a mailbox or a column that kind of defines the space, but it's not, gated in. And then if you scroll down to this other section, it says the uses of gates is discouraged. So one thing I noted is that that kind of is conflicting with the previous comment because it gives a path forward to actually approving some minor entry structures and whatnot. But then it has that exception to the exception, which is, however, if desired and found appropriate by the ASCC. So this kind of overall entryways, it seems that The language of the code or the PUD, albeit in conflict and confusing, allows for the ASCC to approve some minor structures or entries, gates. However, previous sections say that like a building permit, which from staff's perspective is a larger component, like an accessory structure, like 400 square feet, ASCC could delegate that to town staff. So the conflict is the scopes of work seem to kind of be the spectrum. And so I'm gonna go to another component that we look at. So fences and site walls. And so this is kind of the same language. It talks about at its option, the ASCC may delegate review responsibility to staff or the BODC. In conferring with Carol, it is my understanding that fences, a standalone fence permit not subject to a PUD, generally is something that we as staff could review if it's not within setbacks. We do a courtesy notice to neighbors. There's certain paths forward that would only allow a staff ministerial review. So this language kind of aligns with how we typically process fences and site walls. Going to exterior lighting component, all exterior lighting shall be confined to the building envelope, except that lighting may extend beyond that building envelope to the satisfaction of the ASCC if the lighting is necessary for safety. So my understanding of this code section is if you do path lighting or anything that's not directly attached to the house, the ASCC may approve it, or it's to the satisfaction of the ASCC and it shall be subject to ASCC approval. In conferring with Carol, with respect to like low voltage path lighting, for example, say an applicant comes in for just that they're just installing path lighting. There are some examples where they would not need a building permit. If it's just a plug and play off the shelf type of system, or even nowadays you have a solar powered path light, there's not a building permit requirement for that. So it's interesting that the PUD would potentially require that solar powered path light to come to ASCC for approval. Going to exterior colors and materials, this is a very interesting component. So exterior and color materials, whether used in the initial house construction or additions, or for repainting or refinishing, shall be subject to prior review and approval of BODC and ASCC. So repainting and refinishing existing exterior materials, like you're repainting a house, we don't require a permit under general circumstances, but this language references that you would need approval from ASCC. And let me see, I think I have one more example, landscaping. So this is the big kind of confusion category, if you will. So there's language that talks about, I guess, the initial development of the properties with the landscaping. It talks about the installation of plant materials and irrigation zones around the home should be subject to review and approval by BODC and ASCC, and shall be prepared in conformity with the planting and land management provisions of the PUD. There's another section that says all planting within this zone is subject to prior review and approval by the ASCC. Further landscape plan and design and actual landscaping shall be accomplished to the satisfaction of the ASCC. And so this language and the language before, it doesn't really give thresholds. So typically we deal with thresholds when it comes to the code. So for example, if you're doing more than 1,000 square feet, the outdoor water efficiency ordinance kicks in. So you have to provide a landscape plan, your WELO calcs, all these other things. And then there's state requirements. This language, you could interpret it, or I look at it from a devil's advocate perspective, is this language could mean I'm replacing 3 manzanitas, for example, on my property, and that has to go to ASCC for review and approval. And so and then planting plans shall be submitted to ASCC for approval. There are instances where someone could do a minor landscaping project that we as staff may be able to approve on outside of a PUD if they fall under those certain square footage thresholds. So those are a few examples that the language of the PUD is confusing when it comes to direction. And so I guess our interest is finding out how ASCC would like us to approach projects that are within that kind of nuanced or gray area where we don't get guidance from the PUD in terms of referral to ASCC and advising the client on how to move forward, because there could be an instance where it could be the difference between just a building permit or an ASCC permit for the landscaping. And so with that, that's pretty much the extent of my informal presentation. So I'll turn it back over to Laura.
So what we would appreciate is some feedback on how you would like us to address this. I think it's a good starting point to think about what types of projects ASCC would want to see as the full commission. And then maybe a step down from that would be what types of projects you would want the planning director, myself, to review with the chair and make a decision about taking it to the full ASCC. And then maybe if there are scopes of projects where you think it would be acceptable to have one ASCC member review the plans. And then the kind of the lowest tier in that scale would be projects that staff would approve just at a staff level, still looking for consistency with the intent in the guidelines that are within the PUD. So those are kind of the tiers that I see, that any combination of those I think would be appropriate. And I think it's really up to the commission to give us feedback on what you would like to see.
Thank you, Laura and Dylan. And before we start a discussion, let me just ask if there are any commissioner questions for staff about the presentation. Everybody looks pretty good.
Is there an
Oh,
intent
Kenny,
to edit,
go ahead.
to make edits to that document? Is there an intent to make edits to that document as clarification? Sorry.
It is not our intent to do that. Our intent is to try to interpret it. Taking up an amendment to the PUD is a very significant undertaking because it would require going back to their HOA, going back to Planning Commission, and in some cases, even potentially up to council, depending on how the document was approved originally. So this really is an exercise in interpretation.
Okay, does the town staff, is there sort of a unanimous, obvious, desirable direction from the town staff in terms of having authority over anything for which there is ambiguity or passing the authority onto the ASCC?
I wish I had a good joke about being a power broker, right? As the planning director, I never, I always want to balance what's a good use of time for everyone. I really always appreciate how much positive feedback the ASCC gives and how much projects are improved by coming through the process. But we also don't want to be so burdensome that too many things come through and it's not a good use of the residents' time and it's not a good use of your time as commissioners. So to me, an ideal situation would be thresholds that are linked to other thresholds that we have in the code. Like Dylan mentioned, there's already a threshold for square footage of landscaping that requires other requirements to kick in. So maybe that's an appropriate place to either bring back to the full ASCC or to have a commissioner provide us feedback. There are some very minor things, very small square footage of landscape changes. Just because maybe a new family has kids of a different age and has different outdoor play needs. It's very close to the house. It's not visible. I would like to do those things at a staff level. So that kind of gives you a sense of, the range I think that we should aim to fall into.
So you have an approach that you would use if something was not in a PUD, right? And it's clear what you do, and we think that set of guidelines is reasonable already. Couldn't we just use that as a default in cases where the PUD documents are unclear, so that if it doesn't specify clearly what needs to be done, then we'll just fall back on what our normal processes are.
I think that falling back on our normal process is a very good starting point. We would though, I think in order to be compliant with the PUD, have to take that application and forward it to one ASCC member if the PUD says it's subject to ASCC approval. Because we
Okay.
would still want ASCC to have a hand in that decision. It would just be a lighter hand.
Okay, that's a good
That
point.
that
Yep.
is an easy step for us to do. And as all of you know, except Kenny, you'll be doing this too. This is something we do routinely and it works very well for us.
Right.
That
Yes.
is a good potential solution.
Okay. Yeah, I like that one.
I
Okay.
support that.
So every time something like this comes through to the ASCC, do the residents have to pay more money?
If it's heard by the ASCC, yes, they pay the application fee, they pay the deposit. You know, we work with them to develop a complete application. We write a staff report.
The complete ASCC, not just a member coming to view the situation.
So what I just said is when it's the complete ASCC. If it's just a member coming to review for routine items that don't otherwise need a planning permit, we're just doing that as part of the plan review or plan check, so there's not additional cost to them.
Okay, good.
Any other questions for staff?
Brief comment, just for edification. Historically, I was on the planning commission when this project was approved, and I do recall some of the discussion around the involvement of the ASCC and further changes. And I think you're absolutely right. The intent was for a light touch in most cases. I mean, obviously it wasn't thought through thoroughly, but I think that was the case in most of the time. So I think that's the right approach, at least to start with.
Thanks for that, John. And it looks like we're opening oral communications on this item. It looks like Judy would like to speak as well. So Judy, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. It didn't come up in Dylan's discussion, but the relevance of this is interesting that it's on your agenda now, because just this summer, there was a significant thing that happened at Blue Oaks. Actually, as an aside, it was at Blue Oaks where we first ran across these extraordinary manzanitas that started this whole process with the revision of the trees. But in the summer, the Blue Oaks, as part of their PUD, there's fire prevention maintenance as part of their land management plan. And this summer, there was a large area of hillside up above the Blue Oaks Trail that was basically denuded by mastication. Big machines went in there, and it was a real eyesore for the ranch residents. And that had evidently gone through some, I know about it just because people called conservation and went, what the hell is going on? And several of us got involved. We went out, looked, Howard went out, the town sent someone else out. But I believe there's some sort of a process. The fire folks had okayed it, been one of these rubber stamps where they said, oh, we've got this plan, we're doing the same thing we've done before. And so fire went, sure, go ahead. And clearly they needed to do some clearing in there, but the extent of it and the way it happened was pretty overdone to most people's point of view. And so I'm not sure what the document you're looking at now has to say about process. It seemed to us at the time that someone from the town should have weighed in on the extent or the amount or the procedure that was used, etc. And so it's not exactly the same thing you're talking about. It was very close in terms of what does the town have to do? What should the town be involved? When should the town be in the loop to protect the larger community?
Yeah, good point. That it's like activity should have gone through the town according to the PUD. And somebody may have been under the incorrect assumption that if they got the fire department's okay, that was sufficient for the whole town. So, a question that came up in my mind during this discussion, and I guess it's a question for Dylan or Laura, is how often does somebody who's doing 100 square feet of changes to their approved landscaping plan, how often do they come to the town? I mean, is that even something that is a thing? When
We
he
get
plants
a
a
lot of
new shrub,
inquiries.
they come to the town first?
Yeah, we get a lot of general inquiries where they check with us to say, do I need to get a permit for this?
Mm.
So that's actually really common, and it does go down to very small scopes of work here because they know that the town regulates many things. And so that is a pretty common occurrence for us.
Okay, good to know that.
And I'll add that oftentimes, going back to the HOA question earlier, oftentimes the interested parties will call just kind of informally early on to ask. I know that the homeowners association said I should speak with the town in terms of what I can and cannot do. In my experience, it's been small components. So they're doing a trellis and they're doing a little bit of a path to the trellis and a little bit of landscaping. And so they can't really make sense of do the small components cumulatively require a permit or not. So oftentimes it's kind of referred back to us from the HOA to kind of make that determination.
So Laura, do you know what, if anything happened after this summer, after the brouhaha that went on at Blue Oaks? I know Howard was out. I know that the town was pretty involved in it. Was there anything structurally done in terms of next time before you do this, you must check with this, or I just never heard the end of the story.
Or maybe John knows.
Well, I don't want to misspeak, right? Because this is, off the top of my head, but we did go back and review the original approval documents, and the original approval documents did call for pretty extensive clearing and removal for fire safety reasons. I think the reason that it was such a large work that they undertook is because they didn't do the small periodic work that they were supposed to do over time, and then came in and kind of made up for that. So I think that probably was not appropriate, but I don't want to give the wrong, conclusion about overall whether they were in compliance with the PUD or not.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any other public input on this?
We do have a hand up, Nicholas hand up, so I'll
Great.
have him talk.
Hi again, Nicholas.
Hey, just as a note, I always, pretty sure always, provide notice to the town before I do clearing on our property. Just as a general rule, I would strongly recommend that the town defer and not create additional obstacle or expense to ensure fire safety as recommended by the fire marshal, who has that specific form of expertise. Notice is always good to provide. On the other hand, there is a state established entity in the form of the fire marshal, who is a repository of decisions as to what is a nuisance, what is a risk from a fire perspective. And I would urge that we defer to that individual.
Thank you for that input. Anybody else from the public? Okay, let's close the oral communications and come back to commission for the thoughts. And I'd like to start with Al.
Okay, well, you kind of got my input earlier when I asked my question. I think that, basically where things are unclear, we should defer to our standard processes. And to the extent necessary, the staff should involve an ASCC member to conform to any direction specified in the PUD to review with the ASCC. That would be my approach to kind of a general process to handling this issue.
Great, thank you. Jane.
Well, I'm essentially always for reducing any bureaucracy we can. So I think, you know, just making it less onerous for residents is, if we can still achieve the same results, is the best way to go forward.
Great, thank you. Kenny?
I agree with both the comments of Alan and Jane. And that it sounds like the town has a sense of what would be most efficient, and is looking for some deferment of authority where it's ambiguous to decide on what's most efficient, and I support that.
Great, thank you. And Megan?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And as Kenny will learn too, is when we do send out just a member of the ASCC, you know, it most likely starts with the chair, or then the vice chair, or someone who has a particular, not specialty, but someone who has great knowledge of this topic, whether it's lighting or planting or whatnot. We'll choose one of those ASCC members. And I think it's very effective. And I think it's an easy way for the ASCC to participate without bringing it to the full commission and everything associated with that. So I absolutely agree.
Great, thank you. Well, my thoughts on this are that what we're really being asked here is whether it would be appropriate to apply the same standards and procedures to the Blue Oaks PUD as are applied to other applications or other activities outside the. And I think that that is a good and fair interpretation of the intent of the PUD requirements. I don't see anything in there that's inconsistent with that. And I would extrapolate that, as I think we have in the past, to other developments in town, other PUDs. We've got Westridge, we've got the ranch, and there are a couple of other smaller ones. And I think that that system has worked pretty well. And I think consistency is a very good thing for PUD owners and non-PUD owners. To the extent that we can make it harmonize, we're all better off. So I'm very much in favor of Al's suggestion of using the same protocols that we use and that staff uses for other applications. So that would be my recommendation. Laura, is this, oh, Jane, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just wondering, do we have a checks and balances for the homeowners associations that we have currently in town? I mean, is Blue Oaks in compliance with, you know, accounting and minutes of meetings? Because I mean, I know obviously we've still got Westridge outstanding. I don't know whether they've sorted themselves out yet as regards their accounting and their minutes and their registering with the Sterling Act. So I'm just wondering whether the homeowners have to be in compliance as well. The associations.
I'm sorry, we, the town, do not have a role in making sure that the HOA is in compliance with its own rules.
Okay.
What we do is we advise property owners when they're in an HOA that they need to work with their HOA and get any appropriate approvals. We do ask for those approvals because it helps us to know that it's already been approved, and it's the best use of time if it's already been approved by the HOA before it comes to us. But legally, we do not hold up processing applications while we're waiting for the HOA approval. So it's up to the HOA to enforce their own rules with those homeowners. Is that helpful?
Well, I wasn't aware, but this is sort of a personal thing, but I wasn't aware, but we needed a new roof. So we received a quote and we accepted a quote, and it came through the town and it was approved through the town, and I didn't even know it was going in, but this was recently. And then Westridge wrote to us and said, can we have your materials list? So, but as far as I knew, something like the town overrides Westridge. So that's just something, I'm not sure. If the town overrides all of these homeowners associations, why do they need to come, go through the homeowners association and not straight to the town?
I wouldn't say that the town overrides the homeowners association. I would just say that the approval processes are separate. So every homeowner has to meet the requirements of the town. And then if you're in an HOA, you have a separate legal relationship to that HOA, and you need to meet that legal requirements of that relationship, whatever your CC&Rs or whatever your guiding documents say. So they're kind of parallel things that are happening typically at the same time, and hopefully the HOA a little before the town process.
Even if
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think that's well said. That's my understanding also.
But if the HOA isn't in compliance with the legalities at the moment, do you still need to do that?
I mean, it's
Well,
a separate issue. It's not a town issue.
Yeah, it's not a town issue at that point.
Right. It's just not a town issue.
Jane, as I understand it, the homeowner's relationship with HOA is a contractual one. And if a homeowner had a disagreement with the HOA about enforcement of HOA rules because of a defect in the HOA, it's not operating properly, for example, then that would be perhaps a basis for a homeowner to challenge the HOA's ruling. That would be outside the town. That would be a maybe Superior Court issue. It wouldn't have any bearing on the town's review. I don't know that the town even keeps track of whether HOAs are fully in compliance with all of the state requirements of an HOA. So
it's just a confusing thing for me as to whose decision actually, if they conflict, whose decision would override the other,
yes, it is.
You actually have to get approval on both.
Yes.
One doesn't override the other. You need approval from both.
And over the years, we've actually had some pretty interesting discussions with WASC, the Westridge Association Site Control, whatever it's called, where we have homeowners come to us with an application. We've approved something, but WASC shoots it down. And they get into an argument with WASC and say, well, ASCC approved it. And then we have to explain that our approval is not sufficient. So you need to get an approval from us, but you also need to get an approval from Westridge. So as I was saying, there's separate, somewhat parallel processes, and they can be in conflict. And I forget the address of the project, but we had one where, and Al, I don't recall if you were on the commission, but I know Megan was. There was a house being redeveloped on a site where they were changing it in a way that the ASCC really liked and WASC really didn't like. And in fact, I think the house was visible uphill from Rusty's place.
Yeah.
And it was Rusty specifically that didn't like the design of this house.
Right. I remember.
And this went back and forth between WASC and ASCC like 3 times, with almost like, appealing to the other parent. Well, Dad, can I do this? Go ask your mom. It was one of those. So yeah, it can be confusing, and it can be, I imagine, really frustrating for somebody in an HOA that is trying to get permission to do something that seems perfectly reasonable, but separate processes, and the town doesn't know or track whether there's a challenge available to a homeowner in their dispute with the HOA. But I could imagine that happening on a regular basis.
Well, it just seems, I mean, that because then when you're looking at the PUD for Blue Oaks and things like that, it just, you never know whose decision.
Well,
So just get both.
the
Just
PUD
need
is
to
an
get
agreement
both.
between the HOA and the town.
Mm.
So the PUD is a little bit separate from the HOA requirements, the CCNRs,
Yeah.
where we're around a lot of acronyms. But the PUD is an actual municipal code that the HOA and the members of the HOA, the homeowners, are required to comply with. Doesn't have anything to do with the standing of the HOA with the state. So the PUD is town's requirements upon the homeowners in the HOA. And
Right.
I think I got that, Laura, is that pretty much right?
I would also add that kind of some of the best practices around drafting PUDs have changed over the years. So I've reviewed a lot of older PUDs that give more reference to the homeowners association than newer PUDs do. So there's been more of an effort to really kind of separate these requirements and make it clear whose requirements they are. So it's not uncommon for a PUD in this age range to have some of this kind of confusing language that either says their design review commission or the ASCC.
Right.
That was just a common way to write it then, but we wouldn't normally interpret it that way today. We
Yeah.
want a separation today.
And it's pretty much always an and, as far as we're concerned. You have to get, well, the homeowner's required to get them both. The town doesn't really care whether the homeowners association approves or not. That's a separate issue. I mean, we care as people, but as a as a governing body, it's not really relevant to us whether the HOA has approved a project or not. But logistically, it's a whole lot easier if the HOA approval comes before the ASCC review. That way, we're fairly confident that what we see before us is not going to be terribly controversial and take years to resolve. So that's a practical issue, not a legal one.
So Jane, I'll use an example. So you said you had to do a re-roof. So if I was reviewing your application, I would approve it as long as you're meeting the town's light reflectivity value. So you have a dark finish. Let's say Westridge has a particular color palette that you have to use, be it brown or black. Like they have a specific color that you can use. So the town approves the re-roof because the color that you're proposing, if you haven't gotten WASC approval, let's just use that as the first example. We approve it because it meets our requirements for the LRV. But say you go to WASC and you say, I've gotten approval from the town for my re-roof. They say, well, this gray slate, for example, if that's the color you're using, doesn't conform to the approved colors that we allow in the community for your roof. You would have to modify your roof color to conform to their requirements, but you still have your approval through the town because the two colors we would assume meet the LRV values. So the HOA can be more restrictive in certain components, but they can't be less restrictive. Like they can't say you can have a white roof and we tell you you have to have a dark roof. That's kind of an example where there's a disparity between the two. So we generally implore people because there can be less restrictive requirements or more drilled down requirements is the best way to put it from neighborhoods. We implore people to get those approvals before they get town approval, because there may be an example like I gave. You may get approval from the town for a less restrictive requirement, but then you may have to change the color, which could involve cost on your end because the Westridge HOA hasn't opined on that color. So I hope that helps a little bit more with your particular example that you're presenting to us.
Right.
Okay, so bringing this back to what's in front of the agenda, Laura, are we being asked to just sort of offer this discussion as guidance for staff? Would you like some kind of a motion, or how would you like to end this item?
I don't think we need a motion. I think that we have a strong consensus and agreement among the commissioners. And so what staff is going to do, just for the record, is we just have notes to file that we keep with some of this PUD. So we'll just include a note to the file that'll go with the Blue Oaks PUD, and we'll attach the minutes of this meeting. And so we'll implement it the way that we discussed. And if there's ever a question about, the scope of the project, there are many things that are small items, but cumulative, they could have an impact. Then
Right.
staff will review those with the chair, and we can make a decision about whether it needs to be reviewed by the full ASCC or do something different. So I think
Great.
your feedback and direction is really clear and helpful tonight.
Okay. And I think just thinking back to a revision like this we made a few years ago, the 400 square foot rule for developments that are required to go to the board, there was a question about, well, what if it's under 400 square feet, but staff feels like it needs board review or want to consult with the chair to decide how to move it forward? And so that discretion was put into the procedures. And I think it's worked very well. So we've seen a few reviews that wouldn't necessarily need to come to the full commission, but with staff's judgment, they have. And so we rely on staff's judgment a lot. That's worked out, I'd say, pretty well to increase efficiency and the applicant experience as well. I mean, I hate to think that every minor change in Blue Oaks has to come before the commission. So I think this is a good way to go, and I think Al summed it up the best.
Great.
All right, anybody else on this item, or shall we close it?
I just wanted to say, this is not related to this, but I have serious apologies to all of you. I scheduled a meeting at 5:30, thinking that this was a small agenda, and this is something I cannot miss and back out of, and I maybe overscheduled myself. But I would like to, if I can, approve the minutes, or vote for that myself now, because I looked through them and they were wonderful, and I miss Dana, and I love all those wonderful things from her son. But I do need to leave,
Right.
and I will no longer underestimate the agenda. And I miss you all terribly. And Kenny, I'm so grateful to have a new, fresh face in mind in our committee, and look forward to meeting you in person as soon as possible. But I do need to
Thank
go.
you.
Okay, good night.
Thanks,
Okay.
Megan.
Thank you.
Bye, Megan.
Bye.
Okay, well, we're almost there to the minutes, but let's deal at least briefly with item 5. A discussion of what we as commissioners think would be good priorities for the town to be working on in the somewhat longer term. Not even necessarily just for the year, but from time to time, we talk about things that we wish were being handled or handled differently. There's a study session coming up at the end of the month with Council and Planning Commission. That'll be an opportunity to suggest some items to receive further attention. I'd like to kick that around a little bit, get people's input, and ultimately be able to recommend 1 or 2 or maybe 3 prioritized subjects for further thought and possible in the long term ordinance changes for the town. So let's just start. Maybe somebody can start off with what they think is a missing piece of the puzzle that could benefit from some greater staff attention. And by the way, this input will go into setting priorities budget-wise as well. Obviously, with resources, we need to keep in mind that not everything on our wish list can be addressed, but what are the priorities? And Jane, since you're right in front of me, why don't you start out? What do you think?
Well, the only thing that I keep coming back to is the changes that we're currently having to deal with for fire safety. And then I'd like to have a pre-approved, pre-constructed ADU supplier so that we didn't have to pay, or so that residents didn't have to pay so much for an ADU design, so that they could just basically buy one off the shelf and install it with the, you know, because it was on a pre-approved checklist for the town. I think that's the only things I've got that I'm thinking about at the moment.
Okay.
So
That's good. Al?
Okay, I've got a few things, and and I wouldn't expect that they would all get done this year. There's just kind of a laundry list, and see if people agree with them, or some things may just deserve to be pushed out in time. But I guess I don't feel like we've really got our hands around the issue of homeowners making changes that go against ASCC intent right after they get the final inspection. So I feel like we need to put a little bit more effort into changing processes to try to limit that. So that's kind of the first item, and that goes back to some of the issues we saw with the house at Los Trancos and Alpine, and the one behind the Priory, and the 199 Mapache. You know, those are things we've talked about a few times. Then in alignment with what Jane said, I think that it's really time to refresh the design guidelines with fire safety in mind, and maybe also with sustainability, but certainly with fire safety. And I think that the Wildfire Safety Commission had that in mind also. I think that we could benefit from just a little bit more communication between staff and the commission on activities going on in town that don't require ASCC approval. Things like ADUs that get ministerial approval, and just approvals for building remodels. And really, I think that the value there is that then the ASCC members can kind of keep an eye on those projects. And over time, if the rules aren't really working the way we'd like, then we have some basis for suggesting changes. But with the limited communication now, I think that the ASCC members generally aren't even paying attention to those planning staff approvals. I think that, you know, in conjunction with sustainability, I really don't think that the WELO rules and the lawn size limitations are particularly working as intended. So at some point, I think that encouraging some sort of a joint project with sustainability to update the WELO rules would be beneficial. And then I like Jane's suggestion on some sort of pre-approved ADU models. I think that would be a big plus in town. So those are the things that I've kind of got on my list.
Great. Thanks, Al. Kenny, you haven't been privy to the last few years of discussions at the ASCC on these things. You may well have some ideas about how some changes or attention from the council might improve our process or the results. Have you got some ideas?
I'm sure I'll have more in the future, but the thing that stood out to me in reviewing the design guidelines and the general plan in preparation for joining the commission was the wildfire safety issue. I think it would sort of be a failure to not address that within the next year.
Very good. Well, I don't have anything outside of what's been suggested already. If I were going to prioritize, I would say that the top two items are trying to harmonize the wildfire safety issues and the design guidelines. And I can think of a number of examples, but I'm sure those will come up in the process. And one of them deeply affects Conservation Committee as well, and that is, are we tree huggers or are we more concerned about fire? Or is there a way to balance those concerns?
Yeah, I think we can be both.
I think we can. I think we're good enough to do that. I would note that just in my relatively short time on the ASCC, I'm entering my ninth year now. I've seen a real shift from never cut down a tree and be sure to plant some more to, well, you know, this could be a fire hazard. And by the way, it's humans that have introduced trees to Portola Valley. 60, 70 years ago, it was mostly, or at least 50% open, meadowed hillsides without trees on them, or maybe one or two oaks, but nothing like the forest that we have now. So if we're looking at sort of preserving the natural environment, I would say maybe a little bit less emphasis on keeping every tree and adding some more would be something that would go along very well with the wildfire prevention program. So I consider that one to be a pretty high priority. A pretty close second would be this issue that comes up all too regularly, which is as soon as a building permit final is signed off, then homeowners will sometimes go and do precisely the things that were taken out of their plans during the ASCC process.
Yeah.
And there's no enforcement available anymore at that point, at least as far as we can tell. So there's the whole enforcement piece, and that also includes a discussion of how permanent are these approvals. 20 years down the line, if somebody wants to plant a tree that ASCC took out of an applicant's plans, that's still relevant. So it's a pretty involved discussion, I think.
Yeah.
I think it would be great to have some kind of a brainstorming session about when enforcement needs exist and how they might be addressed. And I'm sure it wouldn't, cover everything, but at least we could get a little farther along. Nighttime lighting is a real good one. Staff isn't generally out roaming around the town after dark. And residents sometimes will make complaints, but sometimes not. But I can tell you, and I'm sure everybody here knows, that there's violations in town of things like uplighting of trees, excessive ornamental lighting on structures, landscape lighting, even on projects that were approved by ASCC, but more particularly in conflict with the town's municipal code. But there really is no enforcement mechanism for it. So it's a tough one. We don't want to be a police state. At the same time, there are certain things that we really want to preserve. The rural character, the dark nighttime skies. So I think some deeper thinking about enforcement is a very high priority. And those are the two things that I would hope get forwarded to the study session. And I probably should open an oral communications portion here in case there's somebody out there that wants to raise their hand and make a comment. Laura, do you see anybody?
No, if any members of the public use the raise your hand feature if you want to make a comment. And I do not see anyone.
Okay. Anybody else want to make a final comment on close it?
I think you picked the two highest priorities. I agree with those.
Yeah. I mean, how and I'd like to add, how would we enforce? I mean, is that a different staff member at the town, or
It's a complicated issue. That's why we have to have it on the list.
Right.
To work
I think
on.
that's.
If we knew the answer, it wouldn't be on the list.
Yeah, that's one of the answers that we would hope to try to get, from a study of this question.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a tough one. It is a tough one. All right.
If I could add through the chair, I am assuming,
go ahead.
but it's good to check. We did a test run of the conceptual design review at our last meeting, which my perception was that the commission found that to be successful. And so I actually would include this on the list because we need to develop and refine this a little bit further. So I would actually include that with the other two priorities.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, I thought that was quite good.
Yes. That's a good addition.
Yeah, so I think those three things would be very good recommendations for Dave to bring to council for that meeting.
Can we have a fourth? Can we have the pre-approved ADU designs? Could we add that one as well? If we're going, if these are the things that are going to the council, I really would like to see the pre-designed ADUs come forward too.
I think that's a really good suggestion. Laura, would it be possible before the study session for staff to give at least a seat of the pants input on how much effort would be required in these things? Because if the ADU pre-approval item would not be very much of a workload, I could see adding that to the list too. It's a extraordinarily expensive process, even though it's a ministerial review. I'd say, except for the ASCC fees, it's about as expensive as building a full-size house in town.
I would say this, I appreciate the caution around what takes a lot of time right now because we have so many different priorities. But there have been efforts that have been going on to come up with some approved ADU designs. John is here in the meeting. He actually served on one of those committees. So maybe the way to phrase this recommendation would be to look into the progress of what some of our partners and friends have done, see if any solutions have come up amongst our colleagues, and see if there's some solutions that we may be able to utilize in town. When we talked about this in a preliminary way, we came up against the fact that we have such different site constraints than most of the other communities in the county. So most people are just dealing with pretty standard, almost flat lots. And so we would probably need multiple different designs based on topography and other things to make this effective. So I don't know that we could achieve having pre-approved ADU designs in the year that we're talking about, but I think we could achieve research, gathering information, and bringing forward any best practices that may work for us. So that might be some middle ground.
That sounds great. Yeah.
One of the things we talked about a year or two ago was posting some online links from the town's website to some approved ADUs, at least in a kind of schematic form, not the permit application, but some examples to guide people a little bit about the sorts of things that have gotten approved, have gotten through the process, as a kind of starting point for people who are new to the idea. So that's another thing that might be included in that discussion, is how to add that to the website.
Yeah, and we're going to be, working on some more comprehensive website updates, and we will be updating all of our ADU materials as part of that comprehensive update to make it easier for people to find all the resources that we have, and then also at Home for All and 21 Elements have developed that we're partners in. They have some example plans, I think, that we could probably point to that might be a little safer. Since plans are copyrighted, we always want to kind of balance that, but there could be some good work we could do around that, working with our partners.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, good suggestions. Anything else on this item? All right, we'll close this item, move on to commission reports. Does anybody have a review or an approval since the last meeting that they want to mention?
I don't have anything.
No, I haven't reviewed. Sorry.
Oh,
I
Jane,
haven't
go ahead.
reviewed anything, but I had an email from Dana Breen, and it was regarding the planting of 4 redwood trees in a line along the Dolin residents' bookbinding room. So I did drive past to check that was what was happening, and yes, it is. So, but I don't know where they are on their approval, because obviously 4 redwood trees along the fence, weren't in the plan. So that was one of the only things that I've actually physically seen.
And on that, I can't speak specifically to that one. So we received that complaint. We are aware of it. They are still in construction. So we have told them that those trees are not approved. For whatever reason, they thought they were doing a good thing. So maybe they just aren't familiar with the town's, planting requirements. And so they have indicated to us that they're going to submit a revised plan, but we have told them that they have a steep hill towards approval for those redwood trees. So I expect to get a revised plan in and share it with an ASCC member.
Great, thanks. I reviewed a revised planting plan for the long time ago approved residential development across the street from town center. Dylan, was the address 845 Portola?
The 2 addresses were 848 and 850 Portola.
Great, thank you. Relatively minor revisions to the planting plans that looked consistent to me with what we'd originally approved. So I gave green light on that one. It seems to me I looked at one other item for Carol. Laura, do you remember what that was? It was also very minor.
I'm sorry, I don't remember that one.
Okay. I think it was the addition of a light next to a doorway on a deck on a approved plan. And the elevation was not visible from any neighboring properties. So it may not have been strictly code required, but it was unobtrusive and arguably for safe purposes. So I approved that application as well.
Question, these revised planting plans go through conservation?
It depends on the scope. We do occasionally send them to conservation, but in general, we have not been. So happy to receive any additional feedback on that.
Okay. I think that would something, in some cases, I'm sure they'd be interested. They sometimes feel like they're not given enough warning on things.
Mm-hmm.
I think with the Dolin residents, I think maybe, yes, that would definitely help with conservation. If conservation saw that plan before as well as us.
Yeah, we actually did target that one for conservation to review. So we got that one, but I'll be more aware of that. This is helpful feedback when we're looking at those to landscaping plans, and we can always, because we can send them out over email pretty easily to an ASCC member and to conservation. So let us try to do that more often.
Good.
Okay. Anything else on commission reports? Great. We'll close that item and move on to any other staff report items, Laura.
I just wanted to give you a brief update. You had an interest in kind of knowing how some projects are going and knowing what's upcoming. So we will be working on more of a list that we'll distribute to you on a regular basis. But in the meantime, I just wanted to give you a few updates. A very big one, you probably maybe saw already through town news or other publications that the town puts out. On January 25th, the ASCC is going to hold a study session on the Stanford Wedge faculty housing project. So we're going to be having 2 study sessions, one with the Planning Commission on the 20th and one with ASCC on the 25th. We do need to be aware of conflicts of interest on this project. So Al has a conflict, so we will not be able to participate. Kenny, we're still going to run your conflict of interest map, and you'll be talking with the town attorney about conflicts, so we still need to check that. But the other members of the ASCC will hold a study session on that project. Members of the public will have 2 opportunities to participate because the meeting format will be the same basically. So you'll hear the same staff presentation and the same applicant presentation at Planning Commission and at ASCC. So that's
on that item, I can attend as a member of the public, right? And just not be a panelist and not comment?
You can absolutely attend as a member of the public, yes.
Okay, thanks.
So that is a big milestone and the beginning, I would call it the beginning of the public meeting process for that project. So it'll just be an introduction to the project and an opportunity for the commission to give any initial feedback that you'd like to provide. You may recall that Jane is your representative on the subdivision committee, which is another requirement of the code. So Jane will also participate representing ASCC in that, and that will come a little later in the process. So Jane, I'll update you when we get closer to that, on how that's going to work.
Will that need to change, because that was a couple of years ago, wasn't it?
It was a while ago. I don't know of any reason why it would need to change. You know, the commission appointed you or selected you for that position. So as long as you're willing to continue, you can continue on that.
Okay.
I think that was an appointment for life. If I recall.
It'll just
No,
feel like
no
life.
getting out of it, Jane.
No, thank you, David. No, thank you. I can't believe they chose that name, Portola Terrace. It just, as the name of the project now, it just, connotations of that word as a terrace is just awful. But anyway.
Well, that's their marketing name. We, the town, are going to continue to call it the Stanford Faculty Housing Project. So that's basically what we're going to call it, because we want to make sure it's intuitive. We're going to keep referring to it as the Wedge property as well. We want to make sure people know what we're talking about. So we're going to stick to our own simple language.
Right.
And Laura, will that be the only significant item on the agenda on the 25th?
Yes.
Okay.
I think about 5 hours. We'll need about 5 hours for that one.
Well, we're certainly going to need some time. So, you know, the format will be pretty straightforward, but Dave can help us along and call for a break if we need it, if the meeting goes quite long. So we want to be prepared for that. And then we have tentative items coming up in the meetings in February. We anticipate 50 Paso de Arroyo to come forward. 245 Shawnee is a addition and site development for changes to the driveway and landscaping. We have also upcoming 115 Tan Oak, which is an addition and remodel with some kind of unusual characteristics that we'll need to talk through. We've got a little further out, I believe the address, correct me if I'm wrong, Dylan, is 19725 Skyline, which is a new barn. And then so those are kind of upcoming projects that are coming up in the queue. Then 2 other updates for you in regards to the fire station that you, I'm sure, remember very well reviewing. Staff has been working with the applicant to address some of the zoning related issues that have come up along the way and the path forward to Planning Commission. So we are working with them on that. And I understand that they have already been working on some site plan changes in response to your feedback. So I'll let you know when that project is going to go forward and what path it's going to be on, but we are working with them on it. And the other update is 207 Westridge, and that's a project where their approval included, they had an existing driveway with 2 access points out onto Westridge, and in their original application, they removed one of the driveways and just created a one-way entrance. But as they were working on the project, they realized that they had site visibility and safety issues related to that driveway configuration. So they applied through the code process, and BPTS is actually the approval body to allow the second driveway to remain. And so they had a traffic engineer do an analysis, and their conclusion was it would be safer and appropriate to have 2 access points for that property. So that was approved by BPTS. So we will be authorizing them to make those changes. So I wanted you to know about that since it changed to what ASCC originally approved. So that is what I've got for you in terms of staff updates. Do you have any other questions on any other projects or things we've been working on?
Oh, I have a few updates. Is that okay?
Go ahead, Dylan.
So at the December 2nd or 7th meeting, it seems like so long ago,
Yeah.
we had the conceptual design review for 85 and 77 Palmer. These are the 2 adjacent parcels. One is vacant, the 77 Palmer, and 85 is the demo rebuild. 85 Palmer has been submitted. They actually submitted on December the 23rd. So they're still going through the initial 30-day commenting period from other agencies. But once I receive those comment letters, that should be coming in a forthcoming meeting anticipated end of February, early March. 77 Palmer is anticipated to be submitted formally based on the comments that they received for the two projects sometime early February. So that one may be further out. So they're taking an approach where both are they're not gonna run concurrently. 85 Palmer is gonna come before ASCC first, and then 77 is gonna, kind of take up or bring up the rear. So those are two that are coming in. And then the application for 880 Westridge that was submitted last year, that application at the request of the applicant has been placed on hold at the moment. Not a withdrawal, but at a hold. And so I'm working with the applicant to determine when they would like to restart the process or to formally withdraw the application and submit a new. So I know that one's been a very large topic of discussion in the community, but that one is currently on hold at the moment. So I think that's everything that's kind of come in the blur of the last 2 weeks before we shut down for the holiday.
Great. Thank you, Dylan, and thank you, Laura. Any other items on staff reports?
No.
We'll close that and move on to review and potential approval of the minutes. As everybody had a chance to read them. Kenny, I hope you didn't study them too hard, but
I had to skim through them enough to be able to say whether I would or would not reject them.
Great.
I looked at them, they look fine to me.
It looks fine to me too. So shall I make a motion to approve the minutes of December the 7th, 2020?
That's
Okay.
welcome.
I'll second that.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
And Kenny, I think you'll need to abstain because you didn't participate in that meeting. The next meeting, you get to vote yay or nay. Okay, well, that's our final item of business, and it is coming on 6 o'clock. So I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you all very much. Welcome again, Kenny.
Thank
And
you.
Happy New Year.
Welcome,
everybody.
Kenny.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thanks a lot. Good night.
All right.
Have a good night.